everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be digging into something really fascinating and honestly kind of mind-blowing. Lab-grown meat.
Yeah, this is definitely a hot topic right now.
It really is. Our listeners sent over a couple of really interesting articles.
Oh, yeah?
One from UFIC, the European Food Information Council, and another from Best Health Style, and they both get into, the how, the why, and all those what-ifs surrounding this technology.
Right, because, this could really change things.
Totally. But before we really get into it, I'm curious, what's your, gut reaction when you hear lab-grown meat?
I guess initially it does kind of make you wonder about the whole lab part.
Totally, but then when you really start thinking about it, it gets kind of crazy.
It really does.
So both these articles walk us through how this stuff is actually made, and it's surprisingly straightforward.
Really?
UFS breaks it down into 4 main steps, and it all starts with a teeny tiny sample of stem cells taken from an animal, kind of like a super gentle biopsy.
And those stem cells are the real game changer here.
Yeah.
They can basically turn into any cell in the body.
That's what I was thinking. It's like they're the VIPs of the cellular world.
Exactly. They're what make us, well, us. Which is pretty amazing on the one hand, but when you apply it to making meat, it definitely has that sci-fi feel to it.
Right. It's like something out of a movie.
Totally. But it's happening.
Yeah.
So you've
Okay.
got these stem cells, and then what?
Okay, so then it's all about giving those stem cells what they need to multiply and actually turn into, meat.
Right.
Both articles talked about these things called bioreactors.
Bioreactors, right? Those are key.
Basically, picture like those high-tech tanks they use to brew beer, but instead of beer, we're talking about muscle fibers.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, it's more complex than just throwing some cells in a tank and voila, you've got a steak. This is where all the really amazing, intricate science comes into play. Inside the bioreactor, they create this perfect environment for those stem cells to multiply and, crucially, differentiate.
Differentiate. So, not just any cells, but the specific ones that make up muscle and, all the good stuff that makes meat, meat, right?
Yeah, exactly. And they often use these scaffolding techniques, which is kind of cool. Basically, it's like giving the cells a framework to grow along. Think of it as like a cellular blueprint to help them organize and grow into the right textures.
That's amazing. It's like building a steak from the ground up, literally cell by cell. I never even thought about the texture part, but I guess that has to be one of the biggest challenges.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, but back to the EUFIC article. They mentioned something called fetal bovine serum, or FBS. What's that all about?
Right, so FBS has traditionally been a key ingredient for growing cells in a lab setting.
But they made it sound kind of controversial.
Yeah, and understandably so. It's derived from, fetal cows, which ethically raises some red flags for a lot of people.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It seems kind of counterintuitive. We're trying to create this more ethical meat, but to do it, we're relying on something that's ethically questionable for many.
I think that's a fair point. But both articles were actually very optimistic about the progress being made with animal-free alternatives to FBS.
Oh, that's great. I think that would go a long way in addressing those ethical concerns.
Absolutely. And honestly, it just makes sense for this technology as a whole, right? Moving away from animal products entirely.
It does feel like this whole field is just moving at warp speed.
It's pretty incredible. Think about it. The first lab-grown burger was only back in 2013, and that felt like such a big deal at the time.
It really did. And now, Singapore is already giving the green light to selling lab-grown meat.
Exactly. And here in the U.S., we're seeing some real progress toward potential approval as well. It seems inevitable at this point.
It really does. So with all this momentum, we really need to unpack both sides of the coin here, right? What are the big potential benefits everyone's buzzing about?
Absolutely. There's a lot of excitement around this technology, and for good reason. But as with any emerging tech, we have to approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism and look at the challenges as well.
But even if it is safe and it takes off, I just keep coming back to, are people really going to be okay with eating meat from a lab?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. You can talk about all the science in the world, but if people just aren't into it.
Exactly. And both articles were very clear about that consumer acceptance is going to make or break this whole thing.
Right. Best Health Style even used the word ick,
Right.
which I gotta admit, even I felt a little bit of that knee-jerk ew reaction. It's just ingrained, right?
Right.
Meat comes from animals, not a lab.
It's true. And to be fair, that word unnatural, it comes up in the Best Health Style article, and it's something a lot of people are hung up on. Even if it's totally safe, it's still a hard sell for some people.
Yeah, it's funny though, right? we're totally cool with all sorts of other food technologies. Nobody's out there like churning their own butter by hand anymore.
Right.
But there's just something about meat, maybe because it's so tied to like traditions and cultures.
Totally. It's like this whole deeper cultural thing, right?
Yeah.
And on top of that, you've got to factor in different generations. Like younger people who've grown up with plant-based burgers and stuff, they might be way more open to this than, say, our parents' generation.
Oh, for sure. My parents would totally not be down with this.
Right. It's a whole thing. And then on top of that, there's the cost, which, let's be honest, is a big deal for most people.
Huge. Both articles were pretty upfront about the fact that lab-grown meat right now is really expensive.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the average shopper right now. More like special occasion, fancy restaurant kind of thing.
Totally. But Best Health Style did say there's hope that as the technology improves, as they scale it up.
Right, economies of scale, all that.
Exactly. They said it could eventually even be cheaper than traditional meat.
Which would be a game changer.
Yeah.
Right, if it was actually more affordable.
Right. I mean, that just seems crazy to me. Okay, but say all that happens, it tastes just as good, it's cheaper, we get over the whole lab thing. There's still a lot we don't know, right?
Oh, absolutely, like long-term effects, for example.
Exactly. Like, what happens if you eat this stuff every day for years?
Right. We just don't have those answers yet. Best Health Style mentioned that more research is needed.
And what about, like, allergies? Like, I'm allergic to shellfish. Could I eat lab-grown fish? Or would that still be a no-go?
Another great question. And again, we need more research to know for sure.
Man, there really are so many layers to this. It's kind of amazing. And, like, on a bigger scale, what happens if this does take off? What about the farmers, the ranchers, all the people who depend on traditional agriculture? Best Health Style touched on that too.
It's a huge question, right? It's people's livelihoods.
It really is.
And it's not just about, swapping one thing for another. It's about the ripple effects across, like, our whole food system. And honestly, on a more fundamental level, it makes you really think about our relationship with food itself.
It really does make you think. So, like, if we get to a point where lab-grown meat is the norm, do we even need, well, meat anymore? Like, is that even a thing in the future?
It's a mind-blowing concept.
I know, right? It's like, what even is meat at that point? It's kind of like a philosophical question almost.
It really is. Are we talking about, like, the cellular structure, the
Yeah.
taste, the experience?
Right. It's more than just what's on your plate,
Totally.
Yeah.
And honestly, it might not be a simple either situation.
Right.
Like maybe lab-grown meat becomes this, like, premium, eco-conscious option.
Right. And then you've still got your traditional farming, but it's evolved like way more sustainable.
Exactly. Or who knows, maybe some entirely different technology will come along and completely change the game.
Oh, for sure. Remember a few years back when everyone was convinced we'd all be eating 3D printed food by now?
Oh yeah, like print me a pizza.
Exactly. This whole field is constantly evolving, so who even knows what the future holds? But for right now, it seems like lab-grown meat definitely still has a lot of question marks surrounding it.
Oh, for sure. And we can't forget that at the end of the day, technology is only one piece of this really complex puzzle. You've got consumer demand, regulations.
Oh, right. Like, will governments even allow this stuff?
Exactly. And then cultural attitudes, global trade. It's a lot.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you really start to think about all the different factors at play
It
here.
really is.
But honestly, I kind of love that we're even having these conversations, Like,
Yeah.
we're living in a time where the future of food is something we're actively thinking about, debating.
Right. It's exciting. And speaking of which, we want to hear from you, our listener. What are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah. Would you try lab-grown meat?
What does a future with this technology on the table literally look like to you? Hit us up on social media. Let us know.
Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about, cells and bioreactors. It's about our values,
Yeah.
right? What we prioritize as a society.
Totally. How we choose to feed ourselves, especially as the world keeps changing around us.
100%. It's really making me think about all the different aspects here.
It's deep stuff. And it all kind of boils down to this. If you think about it, if we can create meat in a lab that is, like, totally indistinguishable from the real deal, ethically and environmentally sound, then what does that actually mean for our relationship with food,
Right.
with the planet, with our whole history and traditions around eating?
Okay. Wow. Yeah, those are some seriously thought-provoking questions right there. This whole deep dive has been full of them.
Food for thought, literally.
Literally. Well, on that note, a big thanks to everyone for joining us on this exploration of lab-grown meat. We hope you're leaving today with, well, maybe more questions than answers.
And maybe even a little bit of that, what's for dinner feeling.
Right. Until next time.